Yeah, so I work at the chapel, right? Maybe some of you guys have seen me at like Fall Retreat or the Lock-In. So that's my job right now. Is I do like a lot of event stuff, and I do like a lot of like, I don't know, the best way to describe it, like media creation is the way that I put it. Just kind of like a lot of video editing and boring stuff like that. But I love it. But I didn't always, I wasn't always able to do this. I was interning here last year. So I think the last time I spoke was in January of last year. You guys are, what grade are you guys in? You're all in the same grade, right? All 9th grade? That's so weird, man. That's so weird to me. I feel like you guys act so much older than 9th graders. So you guys weren't even here for that. But yeah, I wasn't always doing what I do now. Last year I was interning here, but I also worked at a daycare. So that was the second period of time that I worked at a daycare. All right, so I love working with kids. Okay, so I know it's kind of like weird for like a young man to like kids, but I do. I like working with kids. So when I was a senior in high school, I was going on a trip to London with our school, and so I had to raise money for that. So I started working every day at this daycare after school, and then I stopped for a while and went back during the internship last year. And one of my favorite questions to ask kids is how old they think I am, because the answers are just unreal. You know what I mean? Like they have no perception of age. You know, at such a young age, they have no perception of age. And for some reason, I've learned over the past few months that like even adults really have no clue how old I am, which I think is interesting. Like I don't know if it's just the demeanor the way I hold myself, or like my kind of ability to grow some facial hair. Like I'm not sure what it is, but I'll get a range of answers. And I'm 19 I'm 19. So what are you guys? 15, 14, 15, 15, 14. And who's 15? This game's too hard to play. And the rest of you are 14? Okay, so all right, I'm in the same generation as you guys, right? So before we go anywhere, I was thinking about a story that I want to tell. One of my favorite questions is to ask kids how old they think I am, and I could give you a range of answers. But one time I was working at this daycare last year, and it was probably one of the worst days of my life, because I walked into this daycare and I have no like, what's the word, you know, like I don't have a degree or anything. Like I was also like 18, like I have no clue what I'm doing. And so usually I'm in a classroom with like, you know, some teacher that has some certification of some sort. And so I got put in a class with a bunch of kids and no teacher one day, and these kids ran all over me. They were like 3 and 4 years old, and it was nap time, and man, there's a kid named Franklin, and he just, I believe that this kid like was a government spy or something. He wanted to just run me into the ground. He was raising up a revolution, a revolt of these like 13 like 3 and 4 year olds trying to rave against me. I don't know. It has nothing to do with my message, but I just wanted to share the story. But yeah, one of my favorite questions to ask kids is how old they think I am, just because of the range of answers. But what's interesting is that I'm in the same generation as you guys, right? Like I'm only like 4 or 5 years older than you. And so I think it's cool that I get to kind of speak into your guys' life, just because I'm not super far removed from where you're at. Like I was a freshman in high school, like 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. Well, it's 5 or 6 maybe, I guess. But like, I think the generation that we're in, and especially you guys, like growing up is tough. And I think a lot of older people, or a lot of older generations don't give you guys the credit that you deserve for like how hard growing up right now is, and how going through school, how tough that is. Whenever you talk to like maybe your parents or your grandparents, is I used to walk to school in 3 feet of snow uphill both ways. You know what I mean? Like these kind of discounting the tough trials that we go through, just because of like how blessed we are with like the age of technology we're in, right? Like we're kind of blessed with this ability to have smartphones and to like have laptops in school and stuff. But like I don't have to remind you how tough life is, because it's a hard thing. Like entering into high school during a period of like a global pandemic. I know that's all you guys hear about these days, and it's probably like how people define you, and I'm sure you get tired of that, but like even right now, and in the last 5 years, while you're in late middle school, early high school, like this country's in like the most civil unrest it's been in since like the 1960s, right? Like growing up right now is hard, and I don't think people give you guys and myself enough credit for growing up during a time like that. What I think is interesting is like in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes like, God won't give us a trial or a test that we can't handle, right? And so I think it's funny or kind of cool that like you guys are the generation that's tasked with growing up in such a broken world. Like God wouldn't put you guys growing up in this time period if you couldn't handle it. And so when like life is tough or hard, like I think it's important to remember that like you have a hard and sometimes a scary, but a really important and cool calling on your life to kind of go through and enter into like a broken world at the time that it's in right now. Like all of us are kind of tasked with some sphere of influence, right? Like I know most of us may feel like we aren't given a ton of influence, or God hasn't given us, like a kingdom to oversee or some form of huge body of people that we can influence right now. But we all have some form of influence, and it's really important that if we want to like kind of succeed in the tough life that God has called for us, that we don't go at it alone, right? Like I think it's important for you guys to reach your generation. And do that through God's calling. So it's kind of more of just like a little bit of a devote, and I didn't want to go too super hard. But I want to look at a little passage of scripture from 2 Chronicles chapter 34. So that's in the Old Testament. I don't even know if in 9th grade if I knew 2 Chronicles was a book of the Bible. Like I'm not even sure I could tell you that it existed. But it's like around the middle of the Old Testament. And really what's happening in 2 Chronicles and a lot of the Old Testament is like you see Israel, and all the Israelites just keep on saying like, we want a king. That's all they're asking for. And God is just very plain, like, you don't need a king. Like, you guys don't need one. And they're just like, yeah, but we just really want one. Like, you're telling me that I don't need one, but still, I'm really just not going to listen to you. And I kind of just want one, Like, I don't really care what you say, I just want one. So God gives them kings, and the majority of these kings are horrible. They're so bad. But we're not going to look at a bad king today. We're going to look at a good king. So one of the few, I think there's like 3 good kings mentioned in 2 Chronicles, but one of the few is a guy named Josiah. And so in chapter 34 of 2 Chronicles, I just want to read a little bit of this real quick. It says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. So basically what's happening here is there's a kid named Josiah who's 8. So Josiah was born into a line of royalty. So his father was a king, and his father was a king, a line of kings and royalty. And when he was 8, his father passed away. He died, and his dad was a bad king. He was not a good one. Both of his father and his grandfather were not good kings. They ruled poorly. But at 8 years old, he was tasked with becoming a king. Like, that's pretty nuts. Like, we think about how hard life growing up is right now, but I just I can't imagine ruling over a kingdom at 8 years old. You don't even evolve. You don't even evolve your adult teeth yet when you're 8 years old. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine ruling over a kingdom when you're 8. But anyway, he didn't choose this either. Like he didn't choose to become king. He was born into this. And so, really, what I want to focus on here though is when he was 16. Right. So 8 years later, it says when he was 8 years old, he became king. But then. In the 8th year of his reign, when he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. So David isn't his father. That's just kind of speaking about like his dad and his grandfather were bad guys, but he like knew that there was some call on him that was greater, like David, he was a descendant of. So when they say that, that's not his actual dad, but like when he was 16, so a year or 2 years older than you guys, he made a personal decision to pursue Christ, to steward and to lead what he was given well. So that's a lot of big words and a lot of probably stuff that doesn't even make any sense, but I want to kind of dive into that, right? So like, he was given this kingdom, and he had this rule of influence on this kingdom of people, and he knew that was given from God, and so he said to himself, man, if I want to lead these people well, like if I want to do better than my dad and my grandfather did, I know that I'm going to have to seek after what God is calling me to do. And he couldn't do it for himself, right? So he had to, he realized that if he was going to steward or lead what he was given properly, he'd have to go after God himself. You know, like, what's interesting here is, I don't know how you guys have grown up or what kind of like influence you have in your life. I've been blessed to grow up with like parents and a family that is faithful, and my parents kind of surrounded me with Christ followers. But like Josiah, there comes like a time when, I was telling this to Ben yesterday, I heard this quote, there comes a time where your lease is up. You know, your lease is up. You have to stop renting the faith of your parents and start purchase one for your own. You know what I mean? Like when we're kind of growing up in this culture of being surrounded by Christ followers, it's really easy for us to just like get fulfilled by their faith, by our parents' faith, by the people surrounding us. But there comes a point in life, and I think it's interesting that Josiah did this at 16, where you have to make your faith your own, right? And I know not all of us are blessed with that community of believers as we're growing up, right? Like, not all of us have been born into a family like that. And I think this story points into that well, too. Like, Josiah's father and his grandfather were not only bad kings, but they were just like plain bad guys. They weren't good guys. And so what I think is important looking at this is like, you're not defined by your family's like addiction or brokenness. Like, Josiah rose above that, right? Like he pursued God even though his father and his grandfather were not good guys. And so I want you to realize that like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, like, you can rise up above your family's legacy. Like, you're not bound to the brokenness that has run in your family. So no matter where you like come from or who your family is, we all have some form of a sphere of influence, right? And I'm sure none of us have a kingdom or are kings or queens or born into royalty. Does Lockwood have a mayor? Yeah, you guys aren't him or her, right? You're not the mayor of Lockwood, right? You're not Byron. Is Byron Brown still the mayor of Buffalo?
Yeah.
Fact check. Yeah, he is. None of you are Byron Brown, I don't think. None of us have this kingdom, but we all have some form of sphere of influence. Whether it's your family, it's your friends, it's your lunch table, it's your school. Maybe you feel like it's the people in this room, right? Maybe you feel like you have some form of like God has given you some form of influence on the people in this room. No matter what your influence is, we have to, if we want to lead that well, or steward, they use this word, pastors will use this word steward a lot, kind of just like lead or control that well, we have to pursue God. We have to pursue what Christ is calling us to. And we have to, step up, and make a personal decision to do this. And so when we think about like this task that God has given us of like living in such a broken world, we can't do it alone, right? And so I think it's really important for us to reach our generation and reach your generation. And so to do that, there's really a few ways that I think it's necessary for you to understand if you want to be able to reach your generation and influence the people around you well. And the first thing I want you to understand is like, you're going to have to be unwilling to compromise your faith for popularity. I think that's something that you're going to have to start to understand. Like, I'm not saying that you will be openly like persecuted. I think that's a thing that like people will get on stage and claim that like there's a as a Christian you're just going to get like persecuted, which I think you'll get oppressed for sure from the enemy, but like I'm not sure that you'll face persecution in school. People will probably just be like, oh, you're not smoking weed? Like that's weird. Like why aren't you doing that? You know what I mean? Like you probably will face some form of like oppression or some form of like, oh man, you're a little bit different than us. And you have to be okay with that. And with that said, like, don't be weird. Don't use your faith to be weird. Don't use your faith as a place to judge others. Don't use your faith to be mean. Like, that is not, one, those aren't good tactics to reaching people, but two, they just aren't what Jesus is calling us to do. Like, we all know that weird guy that carries a briefcase and a Bible around school and just like tells people they're going to go to hell if they sin, right? Like, we don't want to be that guy, because that's just like, one, not a good tactic to reach people, but also not what Jesus is calling us to do. Like, if you want to reach your generation, there's a few things that I think we have to do well. Like, feeding off of that, like, just as Tiffany was saying, like, it's really important for you guys to bring your friends here, but you're not going to be able to bring every single person here. There's going to be people that you know that aren't going to enter this building and aren't going to want to hear a sermon, but they want to see a sermon. Right? They don't want to hear a sermon, they want to see a sermon. And that is through acting out your life. And so you can reach your friends by just being an example of the love that Jesus has for them. And that's like, I think that's the greatest way that you guys can reach the people around you. And so, how do we lead and steward what God has given us, right? We talk about this influence that you guys have, or that I have. So how do we do that well? How do we do what Josiah did and kind of steward or lead what we have been given well, and be successful in that? I have two things, and then I want to be able to talk a little bit in the community group, so I don't want to go forever. But I think there's two things that we can do. We can be like Josiah and make a personal decision to pursue God ourselves, right? That's the first thing we can do. We can make a personal decision to pursue God ourselves. That's the most important thing that we can do if we want to lead or steward what we've been given well. Creating godly disciplines, right? Reading the Bible and praying. And I'm going to be clear, not creating godly disciplines just for the sake of having disciplines. Not creating habits just for the sake of habits, right? We need to do those things so we look more like Jesus. So we can become more like Jesus. That's the thing. Like, I think a lot of times we can get caught up in like, oh yeah, I read my Bible and I prayed today, and it's like, it's good to create those habits and to have those like guidelines in your life, but if they're just to do them, just to check off a checklist, like there's no point. Like you want to do those things so we can look more like Jesus. And so we want to make a personal decision to pursue God ourselves. And I think it's cool. Josiah did that at 16 years old. Like, we're not too far from that. That was really when I started pursuing my faith, like way more in depth. Was when I was right around 16. I don't want to speak for Ben, but me and Ben have gone through a really similar path. Like, Ben's in the same sort of boat. Like, right around 15, 16 years old. Like, really making your faith your own is such an important thing, and the earlier you do that, the more you take that seriously now, like the greater influence you'll have on the people around you. And the second thing that I think we can do is love like Jesus loved, man. And I know that's kind of a cliche and stuff that people throw around a lot, but it's so important. Like, if we want to reach the people around us, we need to enter every building, every class, every lunchroom, every conversation with a love that reflects the love that Christ shows us. You know what I mean? Like, we just need to reflect. We want to be more like Jesus every day, and the greatest thing that we can do, the two greatest commandments, love God and love others, right? Like, we need to enter every relationship that we're in with a love that reflects the love that Jesus has for us. And I know this is such a short passage of scripture, but like, I think it's really cool that God used this 16-year-old to reach a kingdom of people, and he decided to make that personal. And I think like God is really calling us to the same sort of thing, right? I'm gonna say it again. Like, I know you're not reaching a kingdom of people, but it's just as important as reaching the one person you know. And so a great way to do that is by inviting them to Moby, right? But the best way to do that is by living out your faith through a personal relationship and loving God and loving others well.